5. Rulers and buildings. Figure 1 shows the first balcony of the Qutub Minar. Qutbuddin Aibak had this constructed around 1199. Notice the pattern created under the balcony by the small arches and geometrical designs. Can you see two bands of inscription under the balcony? These are in Arabic. Notice that the surface of the minar is curved and angular. Placing an inscription on such a surface required great precision. Only the most skilled craftsperson could perform this task. Remember that very few buildings were made of stone or brick 800 years ago. What would have been the impact of a building like the Qutub Minar on observers in the 13th century? Figure the Qutub Minar is 5 stories high. The band of inscriptions you see are under its first balcony. The first floor was constructed by Qutbuddin Aibak and the rest by Iltutmish around 1239. Over the years, it was damaged by lightning and earthquakes and repaired by Alauddin Khalji, Muhammad Tughlaq, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, and Ibrahim Lodi. Between the 8th and the 18th centuries, kings and their officers built two kinds of structures. The first were forts, places, gardens, residences, and tombs, self-protected and grandiose places of rest in this world, and the second were structures meant for public activity including temples, mosques, tanks, wells, caravanserais, and bazaars. Kings were expected to care for their subjects and by making structures for their use and comfort, rulers hoped to win their praise. Construction activity was also carried out by others including merchants. They built temples, mosques and wells. However, domestic architecture, large mansions, havelis of merchants has survived only from the 18th century. Labor for the Agra fort, built by Akbar. The Agra fort required 2,000 stone cutters, 2,000 cement and lime makers, and 8,000 laborers. Engineering skills and construction. Monuments provide an insight into the technologies used for construction. Take something like a roof for example. We can make this by placing wooden beams or a slab of stone across four walls. But the task becomes difficult if we want to make a large room with an elaborate superstructure. This requires more sophisticated skills. Rani Ji Ki Bauri or the Queen's Stepwell, located in Bundi in Rajasthan, is the largest among the 50 step wells that were built to meet the need for water. Known for its architectural beauty, the Bauri was constructed in 1699 CE by Rani Nathawat Ji, the queen of Raja Aniruddha Singh of Bundi. Between the 7th and 10th centuries, architects started adding more rooms, doors, and windows to buildings. Roofs, doors, and windows were still made by placing a horizontal beam across two vertical columns, a style of architecture called trabeate or corbelled. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, the trabeate style was used in the construction of temples, mosques, tombs, and in buildings attached to large stepped walls, baulis. Figure 2a. Screen in the Quwat al-Islam Mosque, Delhi, late 12th century. Figure to be corbel technique used in the construction of the screen. Temple construction in the early 11th century. The Kandarya Mahadeva temple dedicated to Shiva was constructed in 999 by the king Dhangadeva of the Chandela dynasty. Figure is the plan of the temple. An ornamented gateway led to an entrance and the main hall, Mahamandapa, where dances were performed. The image of the chief deity was kept in the main shrine Garbhagriha. This was the place for ritual worship where only the king, his immediate family and priests gathered. The Khajuraho complex contained royal temples where commoners were not allowed entry. The temples were decorated with elaborately carved sculptures. Figure 4. The Raja Rajeshwara temple at Thanjavur had the tallest shikhara amongst temples of its time. Constructing it was not easy because there were no cranes in those days and the 90-ton stone for the top of the shikhara was too heavy to lift manually. So the architect built an inclined path to the top of the temple, placed the boulder on roller and rolled it all the way to the top. The path started more than 4 kilometers away so that it would not be two-step. This was dismantled after the temple was constructed, but the residents of the area remembered the experience of the construction of the temple for a long time. Even now, a village near the temple is called Charupallam, the village of the incline. What differences do you notice between the shikharas of the two temples? Can you make out that the shikhara of the Raja Rajeshwara temple is twice as high as that of the Kandarya Mahadeva? Comment this. Two technological and stylistic developments are noticeable from the 12th century. One, the weight of the superstructure above the doors and windows was sometimes carried by arches. This architectural form was called arcuate. Compare figures 2a and 2b with figures 5a and 5b. A true arch figure, the keystone at the center of the arch transferred the weight of the superstructure to the base of the arch. Figure, true arch detail from the Alai Darwaja, early 14th century, Qurat al-Islam Mosque, Delhi. Figure, a painting from the Akbarnama dated 1590 to 1595 showing the construction of the water gate at the Agra fort. 2. Limestone cement was increasingly used in construction. This was very high quality cement which when mixed with stone chips hardened into concrete. This made construction of large structure easier and faster. Take a look at the construction site in figure 6. Describe what the laborers are doing, the tools shown and the means of carrying stones. Comment this. Building temples, mosques and tanks. Temples and mosques were beautifully constructed because they were places of worship. They were also meant to demonstrate the power, wealth and devotion of the patron. Take the example of the Raja Rajeshwara temple. An inscription mentions that it was built by King Raja Rajadeva for the worship of his god Raja Rajeshwaram. Notice how the names of the ruler and the god are very similar. The king took the god's name because it was auspicious and he wanted to appear like a god. Through the rituals of worship in the temple, one god, Raja Rajadeva, honored another Raja Rajasharam, a royal architect. The Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan's chronicler declared that the ruler was the architect of the workshop of empire and religion. The largest temples were all constructed by kings. The other lesser deities in the temple were gods and goddesses of the allies and subordinates of the ruler. The temple was a miniature model of the world ruled by the kings and his allies. As they worshipped their deities together in the royal temples, it seemed as if they brought the just rule of the gods on earth. Muslim sultans and padshahs did not claim to be incarnations of God, but Persian court chronicles describe the sultan as the shadow of God. An inscription in the Kawat al-Islam mosque explained that God chose Alauddin as a king because he had the qualities of Moses and Solomon. The great lawgivers of the past, the greatest lawgivers and architects was God himself. He created the world out of chaos and introduced order and symmetry. Figure plan of the Jami Masjid built by Shah Jahan in his new capital at Shahjahanabad, 1650 to 1656. Qibla direction towards Mecca. Importance of water. The Persian terms Abad, populated, prosperous, and Abadi, flourishing, are both derived from the word Abi, meaning water. As each new dynasty came to power, kings wanted to emphasize their moral right to be rulers. Constructing places of worship provided rulers with a chance to proclaim their close relationship with God. Especially important in an age of rapid political change, rulers also offered patronage to the learned and pious and tried to transform their capitals and cities into great cultural centers that brought fame to their rule and their realm. It was widely believed that the rule of a just king would be an age of plenty when the heavens would not withhold rain. At the same time, making precious water available by constructing tanks and reservoirs was highly praised. Sultan Iltutmish's own universal respect for constructing a large reservoir just outside Delhi-e-Kuhana. It was called the Hauji Sultani, or the King's Reservoir. Can you find it on map 1 in the chapter 3? Rulers often constructed tanks and reservoirs, big and small, produced by ordinary people. Sometimes these tanks and reservoirs were part of a temple. Mosque, note the small tank in the Jami Masjid in figure 7, or a Gurudwara, a place of worship and congregation for 6, figure 8. Figure 8. Harmandir Sahib Golden Temple with the Holy Sarovar tank in Amritsar. Why were temples targeted? Because kings built temples to demonstrate their devotion to God and their power and wealth. It is not surprising that when they attacked on one another's kingdoms, they often targeted these buildings. In the early 19th century, when the Pandyavan king Srimara Sri Vallabha invaded Sri Lanka and defeated the King Sena I, 831 to 851, the Buddhist monk and chroniclers Dhammakirti noted he removed all the valuables. The statue of the Buddha made entirely of gold in the jewel palace. and the golden images in the various monasteries, all this he seized. The blow to the pride of the Sinhalese ruler had to be avenged, and the next Sinhalese ruler, Sena II, ordered his general to invade Madurai, the capital of the Pandus. The Buddhist chroniclers noted that the expedition made a special effort to find and restore the gold statue of the Buddha. Similarly, in the early 11th century, when the Chola king Rajendra I built Rajendra I built a Shiva temple in his capital. He filled it with prized status seized from defeated rulers. An incomplete list included a sun pedestal from the Chalukyas, a Ganesha statue and several statues of Durga, a Nandi statue from the eastern Chalukyas, an image of Bhairava, a form of Shiva, and Bhairavi from the Kalingas of Odisha, and a Kali statue from the Palace of Bengal. Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni was a contemporary of Rajendra I. During his campaign in the subcontinent, he attacked the temples of defeated kings and looted their wealth and idols. Sultan Mahmud was not a very important ruler at that time, but by destroying temples, especially the one at Somnath, he tried to win credit as a great hero of Islam. In the political culture of the Middle Ages, most rulers displayed their political might Sultan Mahmud was not a very important ruler at that time, but by destroying temples, especially the one at Somnath, he tried to win credit as a great hero of Islam. In the political culture of the Middle Ages, most rulers displayed their political might and military succeeded by attacking and looting the places of worship of defeating rulers. Figure Mughal Chahar-Baghs. A. The Chahar-Bagh in the Humayun's tomb, Delhi, 1562 to 1571. Traced Chahar-Bagh at Salimar Garden, Kashmir, 1620 and 1634. The Chahar-Bagh adapted as a riverfront garden as at Lal Mahal Bari, 1637. In what ways do you think the policies of Rajendra I and Muhammad of Ghazni were a product of their time? How were the actions of the two rulers different? Comment this. Garden, tombs and forts under the Mughal architecture became more complex. Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir and especially Shah Jahan were personally interested in literature, art and architecture. In his autobiography, Babur describes his interest in planning and laying out formal garden placed within rectangular walled enclosures and divided into 4 quarters by artificial channels. These gardens are called Char Bagh, 4 garden, because of their symmetrical division into quarters beginning with Akbar. Some of the most beautiful Char Baghs were constructed by Jahangir and Shah Jahan in Kashmir, Agra and Delhi. See figure 9. There were several important architectural innovations during Akbar's reign. For inspiration, Akbar's architects turned to the tombs of his Central Asian ancestor. Timur, the central towering dome, and the tall gateway, Pistak, became important aspects of Mughal figure. A 1590 painting of Babur supervising workers laying out a charbagh in Kabul. Note how the intersecting channels on the path create the characteristic charbagh design. Figure Tomb of Humayun constructed between 1562 and 1571. Can you see the water channel? Comment this. Figure the throne balcony in the Diwaniyam in Delhi completed in 1648. Architecture first visible in Humayun's tomb. The tomb was placed in the center of a huge formal charbagh and built in the tradition known as Eight Paradises or Hast Behust, a central hall surrounded by 8 rooms. The building was constructed with red sandstone edged with white marble. It was during Shah Jahan's reign that the different elements of Mughal architecture were fused together in a grand harmonious synthesis. His reign witnessed a huge amount of construction activity, especially in Agra and Delhi. The ceremonial hall of public and private audience, Diwani Khas Awam, were carefully planned, placed within a large courtyard. These courts were also described as Chihil Sultan or 40-pillared halls. Shah Jahan's audience halls were specially constructed to resemble a mosque. The pedestal on which his throne was placed was frequently described as the Qibla, the direction faced by Muslims at prayer. Since everybody faced that direction when court was in session, the idea of the king as a representative of God on earth was suggested by this architectural feature. The connection between royal justice and the imperial court was emphasized by Shah Jahan in his newly constructed court in the Red Fort at Delhi. Behind the emperor's throne were a series of Pietra Dura inlays that depicted the legendary Greek god Orpheus playing the lute. It was believed that Orpheus's music could calm ferocious beasts until they coexisted together peaceably. The construction of Shah Jahan's audience hall aimed to communicate the king's justice, would treat the high and the low as equals, creating a world where all could live together in harmony. Pietra dura, colored hard stone placed in depressions carved into marble or sandstone, creating beautiful ornate pattern. In the early years of his reign, Shah Jahan's capital was at Agra, a city where the nobility had constructed their homes on the banks of the river Jamuna. These were set in the midst of formal gardens constructed in the Chaharbagh format. The Chaharbagh garden also had a variation that historians describe as the riverfront garden. In this that the dwelling was not located in the middle of the Chaharbagh but at its edge, close to the bank of the river. Shah Jahan adopted the river-front garden in the layout of the Taj Mahal, the grandest architectural accomplishment of his reign. Here the white marble mausoleum was placed on a terrace by the edge of the river and the garden was to its south. Shah Jahan figure. The Taj Mahal at Agra completed in 1643. Figure a reconstruction from a map of riverfront garden city of Agra. Note how the garden places of the nobles are placed on both banks of the Jamuna. The Taj Mahal is on the left. Compare the layout of Agra with Shahjahanabad in Delhi in figure. Taj Mahal, Jamuna River. Jamuna River. Figure 1850 map of Shahjahanabad. Where is the emperor's residence? The city appeared to be very crowded, but did you notice the many large gardens as well? Can you find the main street and the Jami Masjid? Comment this. Develop this architectural form as a means to control the access that nobles had to the river. In the new city of Shahjahanabad that he constructed in Delhi, the imperial palaces commanded the riverfront. Only specially favored noble, like his eldest son Dara Shuk, were given access to the river. All others had to construct their homes in the city away from the river Jamuna. Region and empire. As construction activity increased between the 8th and 18th centuries, there was also a considerable sharing of ideas across region. The traditions of one region were adopted by another. In Vijayanagara, for example, the elephant stables of the rulers were figure. Interior of temple of Govind Deva in Vrindavan, 1590. The temple was constructed out of red sandstone. Notice the 2 out of 4 intersecting arches that made the high ceiling roof. This style of architecture is from northeast Iran, Khurasan, and was used in Fatehpur Sikri. Strongly influenced by the style of architecture found in the adjoining sultanates of Bijapur and Golconda, see chapter 6. In Vrindavan, near Mathura, temples were constructed in architectural styles that were very similar to the Mughal places in Fatehpur Sikri. The creation of large empires that brought different regions under their rule helped in this cross-fertilization of artistic forms and architectural styles. Mughal rulers were particularly skilled in adapting regional architectural styles in the construction of their own buildings. In Bengal, for example, the local rulers had developed a roof that was designed to resemble a thatched hut. The Mughals liked this Bangla dome, see figure 11 and 12 in chapter 9, so much that they used it in their architecture. The impact of other regions was also evident. In Akbar's capital at Fatehpur Sikri, many of the buildings saw the influence of the architectural styles of Gujarat and Malwa. Even though the authority of the Mughal rulers went in the 18th century, the architectural styles developed under their patronage were constantly used and adopted by other rulers whenever they tried to establish their own kingdoms. Figure decorated pillars and struts holding the extensions of the roof in Jodhbai Palace in Fatehpur Sikri. These follow architectural traditions of the Gujarat region. Churches that touched the skies elsewhere. From the 12th century onwards, attempts began in France to build churches that were taller and lighter than earlier buildings. This architectural style, known as Gothic, was distinguished by high pointed arches. The use of stained glass, often painted with skins drawn from the Bible, and flying buttresses, tall spires and bell towers which were visible from the distance were added to the church. One of the best known examples of this architectural style is the Church of Notre Dame in Paris, which was constructed through several decades in the 12th and 13th centuries. Look at the illustration and try and identify the bell towers. Comment this. Imagine you are an artisan standing on a tiny wooden platform held together by bamboo and rope 50 meters above the ground. You have to place an inscription under the first balcony of the Qutub Minar. How would you do this? Comment this. Keywords. Go through the chapter and make your own list of 6 keywords. For each of these, write a sentence indicating why you choose the word. Let's recall, let's understand, let's discuss, let's do, and comment this.